ladies and gentlemen, coming over here, there was a very great lesson. The first 4 hours, we passed over a destroyed land, utterly destroyed. You who have not seen it do not know what hell looks like from the top. That's what Germany looks like.
On the morning of June 5th, 1944, General George S. Patton Jr. stood before the men of the Third Army and delivered a speech that would go down in history as one of the most violent ever recorded. He told his men that the Germans were a bunch of low-down, yellow-bellied, almond-eating sons of bitches. He told them he didn't just want to beat the enemy. He wanted to rip out their guts and use them to grease the treads of our tanks. To the world, Patton was the ultimate German hater. He was the man who saw the swastika as a target and nothing more. But behind the pearl-handled revolvers and the profanity-laced speeches was a man who lived in a state of profound intellectual conflict. Patton spent the war hunting Germans with a ferocity that bordered on the obsessive. But once the guns fell silent and the smoke cleared over the ruins of Berlin, the blood and guts persona cracked. What emerged was a man who held a secret, burning admiration for the very people he had just spent 4 years trying to annihilate. To understand what Patton really thought about the Germans, you have to understand how he viewed history. Patton believed in a warrior class, an elite group of men throughout history who were born for combat. To Patton, the German officer corps was the closest thing the modern world had to his beloved Roman centurions or Napoleonic cavalry. In his private diaries, his tone shifted from the Hun rhetoric of his speeches to a grudging, technical respect. He admired the discipline of the German soldier. He admired their ability to hold a line with nothing but a few rifles and sheer willpower. Yes, he famously said, "The German is a natural-born soldier. He's a dirty bastard, but he knows his business." This wasn't an admiration for Nazi ideology, which Patton found repulsive and stupid, but rather an admiration for the martial spirit. Patton felt more at home in a room full of captured German generals than he did at a cocktail party with Allied politicians. He saw in the Germans a reflection of his own aggressive, no-retreat philosophy. He realized that while the Americans had the trucks and the planes, the Germans had the soul of the old-world warrior. When the war ended and Patton was appointed military governor of Bavaria, his true thoughts became a massive political liability. The official Allied policy was De-Nazification, stripping anyone with ties to the Nazi Party of their jobs and influence. Patton thought this was insane. In his view, the Nazis were just another political party, much like Democrats or Republicans. He argued that the most efficient people to run the water systems, the electricity, and the local governments were the people who had been doing it during the war, many of whom had been Nazi Party members. He famously told a group of reporters, "This Nazi thing is just like a Democratic and Republican election fight." The backlash was instantaneous. Eisenhower was furious. The press called for Patton's head. But Patton didn't care. He began to see the German people not as defeated enemies, but as a civilization that needed to be preserved to protect Europe from a much greater, darker threat. As 1945 dragged on, Patton's diary entries took a turn that would eventually lead to his removal from command. And he began to write about the Soviet Union. He saw the Red Army as a horde of Mongolians who would eventually swallow Europe. It was in this context that Patton uttered his most controversial thought: "We have defeated the wrong enemy." Patton believed that the Germans, properly led and rearmed, were the only barrier standing between Western civilization and the Red Tide. He proposed that the US should not be dismantling the German army, but rather integrating it. He wanted to use German divisions under American command to push the Soviets back to the pre-war borders. In his private notes, he wrote, "The Germans are the only decent people left in Europe. If we destroy them, we leave a vacuum that will be filled by a force far more dangerous than Hitler ever was." This wasn't a defense of the Holocaust, which Patton had witnessed firsthand at Ohrdruf and found sickening, but a cold, calculated look at the future of the Cold War. He was a man who could separate a nation's crimes from its strategic value, and that made him the most dangerous man in the Allied occupation. Patton's refusal to stop praising German efficiency eventually cost him everything. He was stripped of his beloved Third Army and given command of the 15th Army, a paper army whose only job was to write a history of the war. Even in this exile, Patton didn't stop. He continued to meet with captured German generals, including the likes of Gerd von Rundstedt. He treated them with the respect due to fellow professionals. Yet he wrote that the Germans were the most industrious and clean people he had ever seen, and contrasted them sharply with what he perceived as the dirty and disorganized Soviet soldiers. His final months were spent in a state of deep depression. He felt like a prophet whose warnings were being ignored. He realized that the world was moving toward a peace that he believed would only lead to a longer, colder conflict. He wrote to his wife, "I feel like a man who has been used to win a game and then thrown away because he knows the truth of how the game was played." So, what did George S. Patton really think about the Germans? He thought they were the ultimate warriors. He thought they were a brilliant, disciplined people who had been led into a catastrophe by a madman in Berlin. But most of all, he thought they were the only ones who could save the West from the coming storm. Patton's views were offensive to many then, and they remain controversial today. But they provide a window into the mind of a man who didn't see the world in black and white, but in the gray tones of grand strategy. He was a man who could kill a German in the morning and call him a brother in arms by the afternoon. Was Patton a visionary who saw the Cold War coming? Or was he a man who had been seduced by the military culture of his enemy? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to know about the secret diary entries that the military tried to hide from the public, click the video on your screen now.